So you've probably heard people say to work larger to smaller. It's classic artistic advice. And it's really just a matter of designing the painting in 3 layers, knowing the steps you're going to go through. So in this lesson, we have those 3 steps. Planning the composition by designing the big shapes, then laying midtones on top, similar to when we came in with brush pens over the line drawings, and then doing the finished touches, the darkest darks and the small details with a richer, stronger pigment. So I have a few examples of paintings that were done this way. These are in Venice from our recent trip to Italy. So in these images you can see a lot of different intensities of color. We go from the white of the paper to very pale clouds in the sky, and then the darkest darks into the windows. And those are the layers in action that I would build the silhouette of this entire beautiful building, and then break that down into the shadow shapes, and then on top of the shadow shapes, those darkest darks. So each pass adds to the one that went before. So those are the 3 layers and the 3 types of brushwork. And you see it again here in this painting, particularly this big shadow side of the building. Then the darks of all the windows are just laid right on top. Or in the roof, there's all these passages of the red tile roofs, and the details are made by the dark shadows. So just as when we went into the negative spaces, now we're going to go into the positive spaces and lay details on top in a little stack. It's like imagining your picture as layers of tracing paper accumulating. So that's the process that I want to do to make a more finished watercolor. So I'll dive in. We'll do one. I'm going to do this scene. It's a nice view that we found in Tuscany. This is a classic kind of Italian view where you can see the beautiful landscape of that farmland out there, and then the rows of cypress leading towards a small villa with the wine, the grapes. So beautiful Italian scene. This is kind of my favorite painting from the trip, so I wanted to recreate that. And it's got some good examples of big shapes with details on top. So let's go. Now you could of course just paint with watercolor directly, and often I do. But I just want to do a very basic example of how you might give yourself guidelines with pencils. So step 1, we're thinking about those big shapes. So it's the sky, the land, and in the land we have receding hills that go off into the distance. So if I was doing a single line drawing, then each one of those things would be its own shape. So the first set of hills, and then in the distance there's a bluer mass. All right, each one is its own line, and the terrain kind of has wrinkles and sort of areas in the terrain that. So that's the shape that I'm seeing in my head in water. So sometimes people will do a very simple, very light drawing in pencil. I hope you can even see that. It's very pale. And then here in the foreground is where I just want to think about this curving line of the path going down. And there's going to be a house. The house is in here. So I'm not going to draw all the details. I'm just showing how I'm thinking. I'm thinking about the shapes, that hill in the foreground is one of its own shape. And it's very similar in tone. Everything's golden landscape. But it's divided by the path. And then we're going to have the receding rows of trees on top of that. So down here is the zone that's going to be the vineyard. And that's the passage across the house. So I have my distinct kind of passages that I'm going to think about when I lay in the color. And those are just those big shapes. So I'd go to a relatively large brush, work quite wet, and let's see how it goes. So I've been mixing a lot of these warm earth colors directly from the palette. So because this is the undertone, I'm just trying to make interesting variation, charging in when I can, as I've been doing all along. The beauty of this approach, or what I like about this kind of painting, is its simplicity. That it's like, say for instance, the game of chess or Japanese Go. There aren't that many moves you can make, but they add together into a lot of complexity over time. I don't want to have a huge library of techniques. You know, when you're painting very directly out into the landscape, there are enough things that go wrong. Weather, you get hungry, time of day, you don't work fast enough and the light moves on you. So yeah, I just enjoy the simplicity of these few techniques and the way I draw feeding back into the way I paint. Yeah. So that's that big central shape of the landscape. And I know I have a distant hill in there. Let me just tweak this a bit before I carry on. Starting to dry already on me there, so I'll blend that in with a little bit of extra water. That hill back there is the blue distance, so I'm going to actually probably just make that right part of the sky. I hope you can see the logic of all the exercises that I gave you before coming together now. I like to call it my wax on, wax off teaching technique. Why am I doing these weird things? And then years later, or months later, when you come to your watercolor, you see all the brushwork I did with the brush pen is really helping me be dexterous. I did many, many ink drawings with the brush pens. I'm just going to add a little golden glow to the sky. Yeah, I did many, many ink drawings with brush pens while I was learning my materials. Yeah, it's pretty neat how you can practice something that's going to pay off weeks or months later down the line. So the mantra is, as always, larger to smaller. I'm thinking just about those big shapes and see how I'm painting right through all the details that are going to follow. It's very different than tinting in. When we take our sketches and we have a finished ink drawing and we insert color on top, we're like filling in. But here it's shape first, massing out rather than tinting in. So yeah, that large to small is it's always in the back of your head while you're working and letting these wet blooms. Okay, now I'm going to come back and get that blue horizon. I just wanted enough time for the sky to settle down. You know, remember what I was talking about? When do you want your edges to meet? So I left that one to last. I need a little bit of a darker blue, but not too intense. One of these blues I'm using is called turquoise, and it's very powerful. It'll just give me a lot of color. So, watching out for that one. So the fact that it hit that little bloom of water, actually that's okay with me. I want that to be kind of merging with the sky a little bit. Bring this down. Just touches where I want that line to touch. Bring a little bit of this into the landscape. Not too much though. Okay, so this is this very pale underground shape, and it seems like there's almost no shapes going on here, but you can see the bands of sky, the midground and the foreground, sort of three little sections of tone. So that's how if I was doing the single line drawing, that's how I've analyzed the shape, that the hills in the distance are this undulating effect, and then I have this curve of this foreground. So, and that's going to be broken up by the house in there. But that house is made of darks, so they'll go on top. So now is the time to take a little bit of break. It's already beginning to dry down. See these blooms in here? These effects, watery effects, that's the stuff that I love. So let's let that settle and then I'll come back. So I have two big shapes really, land and sky, and a bit of a gradation into the foreground. So now I'm going to start dividing it up. And with transparent watercolor, each wash is going to get consecutively darker, so that's what I'm using. I've laid in the base tone, and I want now darker things to build on top. So this is my middle tone. So I really think of it as I'm going to go across the painting 3 times, light, middle, dark. Of course, you may touch some areas more than 3 times, but that's the theory. So each section, like this is the hills back there, they could use a little strength. So I'm going to treat each section as its own passage and try to get some interesting detailing, light and dark detailing. So into those hills that are in the distance, I'm just coming on top and adding some calligraphic work. So I like to call this calligraphy, that I'm making little sketchy kind of marks and showing through some of what went before. You know, what you reveal of the background. As I said before, that I drew this mountain range by the edge of the 2 washes. Now I'm drawing little detail out there, like that there's forests or stuff going on in these hills. I'm drawing it with light on dark. So the little gaps that I leave behind are part of the drawing. They build up some terrain. So it's like sculpting the earth in these cases. And this is very abstract, that it's just mountains and hills, little shapes. But I just want to think of making variation again. It's always that, making that shape interesting. Yeah. One color at a time. And I'll leave that little passage of light fading through. And as I work towards the foreground, I want to sort of stitch one shape into another. So this is why I let it dry, because when I come in after, oops, that was too much color. This is why I let it dry in between, so that I can be very sharp edged if I want, or get a little smoother if I want as I come back in. So I'm going to make a distant hill there. This is a cool tealish green, blending in with my blue hills. Forget the exact name of that pigment. So I just know that the stuff out there is representing fields, orchards, vineyards, farmlands. This is the sort of bread basket. Literally, you have bread with every meal. Italy is not the country for the Atkins diet. Get some green into that. So see how this shape is beginning to break apart. So in my other drawings, I'm coming back with darks and making and the shape is getting detailed up. It's the same in the watercolor, but a little bit of a reverse. When I work pen and ink with the brush pen, you go straight to that dark, and now we're building up towards it instead of diving straight in. Okay, so I'm starting to see all my second tier of shapes, that idea of large, medium, small. I'm leaving off the trees, even though they are a pretty major part of this composition, but I want to do them last because they're the darkest darks. So let's just put a bit of house in, but I'm almost ready to just let this dry for a minute. Though, you know, when you're working a little bit like this, I'm actually going a bit slow. This is kind of like when I was actually out here. It was a beautiful warm day. And I took my time with the original sketch. Sometimes you don't have to wait for things to dry if you're going slow enough. Particularly if it's hot out. On a really sunny day, the watercolor is going to dry on you too quickly, and you'll have a very hard time getting your wet effects. As I said, as long as the shape is wet, it's alive. So on a super hot day, they quiet down on you. They go dead on you, and then you can't mix into it, because that little bit of roof, I want to be able to touch details into it and know that they're going to blend in. Even let's get some intense color into one side of it. Okay, so that is my mid-tone shapes. Every shape in there has basically been broken up into the next smaller sets of designs, and the field is starting to appear. So now I'm going to dive in for smaller, darker details. As a rule of thumb, that I go down to a smaller brush. I think this is about a number 5, number 4. So these guys, these trees, are just great opportunities to do calligraphic brushwork. I just love these kind of big verticals you get off these trees. And I'm going to be just bouncing around the picture, looking for opportunities to subdivide shapes even further into smaller little elements, and to build that passage of that road. So you can see the scale that I'm working on now. And like for instance, getting into the vineyards. So this passage in the vineyard is almost a single line drawing in color. That I'm just letting the line of these trees, or the vines, work towards me. And that space that I had mapped out before, that I knew I would be using for this, the little dirt will show through of the field. So let's watch as I repeat, or as I carry on, filling on all these little details. We'll go to time lapse and this will quickly come to a close. You'll see how all the small information sits on top of what I have here. So let's see how it goes as I finish it up. So there you have it. My watercolor in 3 stages, working larger to smaller, lighter to darker. So I'm pretty happy. I like the way that turned out. It's got a whole different kind of feeling from a pen sketch, and I really enjoy these, even if they take a little bit longer. Give you a nice sense of having been there. Going through this drawing, the whole time while I was breaking down these shapes, I was just waiting to get to put in the trees and the little details in the vineyards. So there's a real sense of satisfaction when you finish a watercolor and bring it all together with those little marks. So that's it. Thanks very much for watching. I hope I'm already seeing your homework, your comments and questions, and I'm looking forward to sharing all of your travels, working with you on the platform. I'm Mark Taro Holmes, and this has been Travel Sketching in Mixed Media.